international security. Last year, justice was the theme. We had sustainability, a wide variety of topics. When the planning committee was sitting down thinking about what to do as our thematic approach for this year, media was something that was a galvanizing issue that we wanted to address. So for today and tomorrow, we're looking at media from a whole bunch of different conceptual lenses. And so this afternoon's session, we bring to you two folks who are deep in the Washington area establishment that are thought leaders in the field. I want to introduce Dr. Alan Rosenblatt. He will be speaking today. Alan is a digital communications and social media strategist, professor, thought leader. He's been in the field for over 25 years at the intersection of politics, advocacy, media, and education. He's currently the Senior Vice President of Digital Strategy at Turner 4D. He is also a blogger and a regular contributor to a variety of media outlets on a variety of different topics. Alan has the distinction of being one of the first faculty member in 1995 to teach a course in digital politics. He did that at George Mason University, and now, of course, 20-something years later, most campuses have some sort of a course in digital politics. Alan was the first to roll a course of that nature out during his time at George Mason. He is currently also adjuncting at places such as GW, at Hopkins, at American. Alan's got a Ph.D. from the American School of Public Affairs, and was a Ph.D. classmate of mine. Scott Simpson is also here to join us today. Scott, we're welcoming back because Scott is an alum of Millersville. So he at one point was part of the Marauder, he still is part of the Marauder family, and he proudly wore black and gold at that point. Scott has I believe he did, because you had a winning football team here at that point. So everybody proudly wore the black and gold then, right? Right? We're back on the winning track. We're winning some games again. So it's exciting to have an alum back. So Scott, welcome back to campus. Scott's a 1998 graduate at Millersville with a bachelor's degree in political science and communications, and he also is a Florida Gator. He got his master's in political science from the University of Florida. So a little bit about Scott. He is currently the managing partner of Resonance Campaigns, a firm that he launched in 2015. The theory of resonance is that for a message to be persuasive, it must connect to the beliefs and values that people have and then draw a line to desired conclusion. Scott has worked as a pollster, he's worked as a focus group researcher, he's done a great deal of work in this space for a number of years now. So these two folks have expertise in campaigns, advocacy, and how to message products and ideas. I'm extremely happy to have both of you here. And so we're going to let each of our esteemed colleagues talk for 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have a good 20 minutes or so for Q&A. So can we cue it up with Alan?
Small enough space. I'm going to step in front of the microphone. Let's see if this works. So, I guess this is the name of the panel, right?
Absolutely.
So this is the name of the panel.
Right.
So I tried to put together kind of a laundry list of ways in which social media has changed political information and where it's going. So I'm going to run through this really quickly and kind of set up a lot of the different topic areas, give you a snippet of what that's about. We can dive deeper into Q&A. So let's, first of all, we have a president who tweets. He tweets a lot. And he's breaking some interesting rules here because he's using his personal Twitter account, but it's been pegged as an official account. Sean Spicer said the president's Twitter account was official policy statements. The Ninth Court of Appeals has used his tweets as executive order intent in deciding bans on the Muslim ban at the borders, and another court ruled that he's not allowed to block people on Twitter, even though it still does, because it is a public forum that he has established for engaging with people, and therefore he can't rule people out. So this really changes the nature and the line between what's the official channel and what's the unofficial channels. And he's really blurred that in a way that, the way he blurs a lot of things. The other thing is, I really think that one of the things that made Donald Trump so powerful as a president, so effective in his campaigning and in his ability to capture the minds and spirits of his followers, is that by using social media and engaging, presenting his own views, interacting with other people, even if it's not everybody, and even if sometimes there are highly suspect people, he affects this notion of political efficacy. So a political sciencey term, political efficacy is the degree to which people think that the government is responsive to the people. There's internal efficacy and external efficacy. Internal efficacy is how do I feel the government is responsive to me, versus external efficacy, how do I feel that the government is responsive to the people in general. I find that when politicians start using social media to interact with the public, to give a glimpse into their own thinking, they do both simultaneously. Because you can see the president interacting with individuals in a public space, and it could have been you. And so there's this sense of it reduces the boundaries between elected officials and constituents. It increases, while not everybody likes Donald Trump, there are a lot of people that look to what he's tweeting, and it brings them closer and closer and closer to him, and it really enhances that sense of political efficacy for large chunks of the population. All right, so now let's look on how you don't use social media. And I would offer up Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign as a textbook case of how to use social media poorly. It was horrible. For example, a lot of her tweets and a lot of her posts were simply like, here's a really important article, read it. All right, so imagine 1 million people saw that tweet, and imagine 100,000 people clicked on the link. 99,000 people saw the tweet, didn't click on it, she touched them and said nothing of value to them. Nothing of value. In business, we call that leaving money on the table, right? That's terrible. So when you tweet, when you say something, don't rely on people to click through. Make sure that the text of the post says what you want people to know. Because most people will never click. And you just don't want to waste that touch. And if you say something useful, they're still going to share it because there was something useful in the post itself, even if they didn't click on it. And other people that see it down the road, down the line, will click on it as well. So big mistake she had there. After the Billy Bush bus video came out with Donald Trump talking about grabbing women, there was a Canadian author who wrote about a lot of this kind of stuff, who started a hashtag called Not Okay. Not okay. Tweet with not okay your first experience as sexual harassment or sexual assault, and I will retweet you, was what she said. So like 28 million people used the hashtag in a matter of a few days. It was ridiculous. More people used that hashtag than used Hillary's hashtag I'm with her, which, to be honest, another problem. It should have been she's with me. Right? Think about the way, the mindset of messaging there and how it was encapsulated in that hashtag. In that moment, Clinton never used this hashtag. It was more popular than her campaign hashtag. It was spot on the issue of the day, and she never jumped onto that opportunity. Because they had very myopic, this is the way we do it, we don't do it any differently, and we never step outside of our prescribed, predetermined strategy. likewise, on the last week before the election, they had this huge Get Out the Vote concert with Beyonce and Jay-Z and a whole bunch of other performers, and they were offered a platform that would allow them to simulcast that concert, not just over their own Facebook Live channel, but over Beyonce's and Jay-Z's and all of the performers. It would have increased the reach of that concert to 135 million people. And they said, no thank you, that's not how we use social media. That's not how we use video. We use video to talk to our volunteers. Meanwhile, Trump was using, getting literally over 1 billion views on his Facebook video. He was doing daily broadcasts on the Trump News Network, on his Facebook Live channel, and just engaging people on a steady stream of video. The last comparison was social media ads. The Hillary Clinton campaign ran 66,000 unique ads on Facebook. A lot of testing, right? Donald Trump's campaign ran 5.9 million unique ads on Facebook. They varied the color, they varied the background image, all the different component parts to see what works, and then they would run with the ones that worked and discard the ones that didn't work. They took it to an nth level. Facebook offered to embed people on both campaigns to provide them with inside knowledge on how to do all this stuff. Trump took those people in. The Clinton campaign again said, no thank you. How not to use social media. Big issue that we have these days are bots, trolls, and fake news. So things to understand in this space. First of all, what is fake news? Fake news is disinformation. Fake news is not journalistic errors. When journalists report stories, it's a moving target. Every day the story develops. And something that gets reported today may be corrected tomorrow or revised tomorrow as new information comes in. That is the normal journalistic process. But given the rise of fake news, the purposeful fake news to disinform people, there has been this opening for our president and others, and there are other people that do it as well. Duterte, the president of the Philippines, does this. Erdogan in Turkey does this. Putin has done this. Assad in Syria has done this. All following suit from our president of pointing to articles in the press that are critical of them and saying that's fake news. Or any time the news media gets something wrong, pointing to that as evidence that that's fake news in order to sow distrust in the media, which is one of the primary watchdog institutions for keeping politicians honest. Interesting, deliberate strategy. Oftentimes you'll find that fake news blends fact and fiction together, because if some of the things in the story you read are true, it makes you more likely to believe the things in the story that are not true. Association is a very powerful, influential, persuasive device. So, originally, there was this huge creation of a bunch of websites, fake news websites by a bunch of teens in Macedonia who were taking stories from the American culture and twisting them into fake news, and it was exclusively driving eyeballs to their website so they could sell advertising and make money. That's what it was all about, right? And so they tapped into the conspiracy theorists, the people who were susceptible to this kind of information in the United States, and drove people to their website, made lots of money off of the ad sales, right? And then underneath that, political operatives, some party operatives, some independent expenditures, some campaigns started to run their own fake news and disinformation strategies, mimicking the methodology and strategies and tactics of the Macedonian teens, but they had a real political agenda. It wasn't about making money for them, it was about affecting the politics, but they were able to sort of hide themselves among the bushes that were created by the Macedonian teens. The dynamic, think of, there's been some deconstruction of how the Russians use fake news and trolls and bots and how other people have used them. One of the examples was they released the memo when Devin Nunes, the Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, decided he wanted to release a Republican version of their findings, which was very much only the Republicans that wrote it. there was a call out there to release the memo. There was one guy out in Wisconsin, I think it was, who used the hashtag, and they got contacted by somebody that turned out to be a Russian propaganda professional, saying, oh, I think you're the first person to use this hashtag. And then the next thing you know, the Russian propagandist accounts, the troll farm accounts, started to use the hashtag. And those accounts are set up to automatically trigger a bunch of bots to retweet them, right? So they set this up. So it starts out, they find something that has a root in our culture. The propagandists start to push it out, triggering all these bots that create a huge jump in the trend line. Right? And then other people start jumping on it because it's the kind of story that resonates, because there's lots of activity, and it starts to grow a little bit. And then when it plateaus a little bit, the propagandists, the professionals, ping it again and trigger those bots again. It just pushes it up again, and then plateaus, and then they push it up again and it plateaus. And that's how they construct this conversation and drive all this use of a hashtag or all this mention of a story and push it out there. So it's humans, professional trolls being professional propagandists, working to drive bots, triggering real people on the ground who think it's real in a constant, renewable cycle. All right, so then there was this question about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. How many of you have heard of Cambridge Analytica? So during the election, there was this question about how did Cambridge Analytica get all this data. Now, Cambridge Analytica is a company that was based in England, set up in the United States for some work. Steve Bannon was on the board. Mercers, who were Breitbart, the Breitbart funders, were also on the board. At one point, I think Bannon was actually listed as the vice president. And allegedly, the story goes that there was this professor at Cambridge named Mikhail Kaczynski who created an app called My Personality, which, when you install the app, allowed you to take 28 different personality profile tests. But it also was installed in 2014, where the Facebook terms of use at the time allowed people who installed an app to give permission to the developer of the app to see all of your friends. Remember, I heard that this was doable in 2014 at a panel where I was talking with, where the speakers were Facebook developers, and I remember spending a good 10 minutes after the panel yelling at them and saying, what on earth makes you think I can authorize anyone to look at my friends? It's not my place to be able to do that. And by the end of that year, Facebook took away this capability. They shut down that API. But in the meantime, Kaczynski's app was, they thought they were going to get like 1,000 or a couple thousand people to use it. They got like 900,000 people to install the app. They collected data on 270,000 people and on their friends. And then what they were able to do, which included what pages they liked. And so what they were able to do is they were able to correlate the people's answers on their personality profile, psychological personality tests, with the pages that they liked. And then they were able to use that to create a model of, if you like these types of pages, you're likely to be this type of person. If you like these types of pages, you're likely to be this type of person. So they were able to identify people who had authoritarian tendencies, you know, and they started to figure out, okay, we're going to typologize people in order to figure out how to push their buttons. And that was the methodology. That was the whole approach. Now, there's some question as to how much the Trump campaign used this, or rather, you know, they didn't use Cambridge Analytica the whole time, but of course the principle of how they used this probably carried on, because once they got the data from Cambridge Analytica, you don't really need it anymore. Just like, you know, in North Korea, once you perfected the missiles, you don't have to test them anymore, and there's still a problem if you get to the point where you've established it works, and then you can sort of cut ties with that source, and then move on to using it independently. And that's a lot of what we had. This kind of ability to target on Facebook is extraordinary. I know that if I had a budget of about $40,000, $100,000, which is about what allegedly the Russians spent on Facebook ads, I could move 7,000 votes in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania very easily. very easily, because it's incredibly efficient to use social media advertising, especially if you combine that with all those bot and troll dynamics that I was talking about, which doesn't cost any money in terms of ad bots. All right. Now, alternatively, one of the things that I do now that Victor didn't mention is I work at Lake Research Partners, which is a public opinion research firm. And we're doing content analysis of social media to better understand public opinion. But the difference is we're not typologizing people in order to figure out what buttons to press. We're figuring out what issues people are talking about, what language are they using to talk about it, what lenses are they using to talk about it, so we can talk to them in a way that they will hear, that responds to the way they think about it, so we don't talk past them. Very, very different from typologizing and pulling triggers. Another change of how two different directions of how social media and politics are moving forward. You can go one way or the other. Just a recent study just came out showing that the Russian troll farms were predominantly sharing and retweeting, mostly right-wing, alt-right type of sources, occasionally mixing in a little bit of lefties in there, but you know, Prison Planet, Jack Soviet, Sean Hannity, Cernovich, Ingrid Engel, Coulter, Real Alex Jones, those Kellyanne Post, all those top big ones are all far-right stuff. So, you know, if you want to say, who were they trying to favor? Well, that was the message they were pushing out en masse. Now, another innovation in social media. I told you, I'm working through this quickly. I could spend hours on any one of these slides, and I have. But this one I find to be particularly very interesting. So a couple of things have changed on Twitter recently, in the last couple of year or two. Number one, there are no character limits on direct messages. Number two, you can have up to 50 people in the direct message conversation. And you can add people after the fact until you hit that 50 mark. So this is a methodology that was developed by supposedly a non-paid activist in Georgia who wanted to see John Ossoff lose and Karen Handel win in the Georgia 6th special election. This was the one to take David Price's place, who had become Secretary of HHS before he was pushed out because of his own corruption issues. And the idea is simply like this. You create think of it as terrorist cells. Although they're not terrorists, they're activist cells. Each room of 50 people is an organization unto itself. It could be geographically contained, neighborhood, people who know each other, or it could be not geographically contained, however you want to do it. And people can share ideas of how to message. If there's a tweet you want people to retweet, you can actually share the tweet to that group. And everybody sees the tweet, and they just click on it and share it right away. Very simple. Now imagine that you have one person common in every single room, or two people common in every single room. These are the organizers, right? So you can have one person whose job it is to make sure that 10 rooms all get the same instructions. And that one person is able to use this structure to, behind the scenes, trigger. If it's 50 people times 10 rooms, minus that one person overlap, you're looking at 499 people being triggered to share a tweet, or 495 people being triggered to share a tweet at the same time, or within a very short period of time. So talk about driving trends and taking over the trend list. If you can get 100, I've been able, it's been a while, but there was a time where a dozen people could steal a hashtag from somebody else and change the direction of the conversation. It really doesn't take that much. If you can get 100 people to respond within minutes of each other on a hashtag, on a tweet, to share something and to start pushing a message out, you can capture that conversation. This is really important. We'll get to my last slide really talks about why that's important. But this is a very interesting tactic that has been developed and needs to be developed even more for good, I think, as opposed to from my side or your side, whatever side you're on. And this is what it comes. Make sure, yeah. This is the important thing, and I'm going to finish on this point. And this is one of the most important things when it comes to social media and what affects the way people are talking. It's share of voice. When you go onto social media and you search a topic and you see what's coming through on your new timeline, if one side of an issue is dominating the conversation, you only see that one side of the argument. We have a real problem with ghettoization of access to information. During the 2016 election, the Wall Street Journal ran an experiment called Red Feed, Blue Feed. And they created 2 Facebook profiles. One which they spent a few days clicking on conservative sources and liking conservative pages. And the other one liking and interacting with liberal content. And then they let them run. And what they found was that the news feed for those that clicked for the page, the profile that clicked on conservative content, only got conservative content in their news feed. And the profile that was liberal only got liberal stuff in the news feed. What does that mean? One of the implications of this is that I mentioned the Billy Buss video from Donald Trump grabbing women's parts, breaking on the news. Well, there is a large segment of people in this country who never saw the video during the campaign. Never, ever saw it. Because their feeds did not contain any links to it. Because they were only getting that conservative spin. And so, when other people started to talk about it, their reaction was, bullshit, prove it. It's not true. I've never seen it. How you're making this stuff up. Oh, it's only coming from the liberal side, right? When in fact it was an audio tape, which, interestingly, if you listen to Trump's response to it, at first he admitted it and he said it was locker room talk. And then a year later, he actually floated the idea that it wasn't really him, that it was a fake audio. So he went from admitting it and acknowledging it to a year later telling people that it wasn't actually him. And there were people who never heard that original conversation, who only heard this and may have heard about the video later on, who said, oh yeah, he said it's not really him. And because that's what they're seeing, that's their content, that's why you have to win. That's why he gets to influence them. So share of voice becomes really, really important. So if you're in a political campaign, or if you're in an advocacy campaign, the important thing is to figure out, okay, what are people saying about my issue, my candidate on social media? How is it being segregated? So for example, maybe we look at like Nancy Pelosi, and when people talk about her using her Twitter handle, they say nice things about her. And when people talk about her using Nancy Space Pelosi, where just her name, they say really anti-Pelosi things. And I looked at the numbers, and the number of people who are using her name with the space and saying bad things about her are like twice as many people per day as those who are saying it, as the peaks of people were saying her own name. And it's sustained over multiple days where it's just occasional peaks on the other side. So if you want to think strategically, what do? Well, you want to make sure you mobilize your activists to participate in the conversation over here that they're not participating in yet, to use the language that the other side is saying to say your message. And this is an important thing because, again, if share of voice at large is important, but if we have this truly segregated news feed, truly segregated social media feed, you may have as much of a voice as them, but only your side hears it and only their side hears it. And those are echo chambers. And what you need are amplification chambers that push it out beyond your audience. So one final comment on it. There have been a couple of interesting organizing on social media that I've always suspected were not truly trying to accomplish what they said they were trying to accomplish. There was a group that was set up to be a progressive democratic group, and the organizer of the group was convincing everybody that the key to build their social media audience and their social media power was to only follow people who were using our hashtag and to unfollow everybody else. So what do? You take somebody who has some people who agree with them in their following and some people who don't, and you tell them unfollow the people who disagree with you, follow only the people who agree with you. You'll get a lot more followers, but you're only talking to the choir. And so this methodology was they convinced tens of, like 30, 40,000 people they convinced to do this. And they took all these people that were proactively promoting progressive democratic messages, and they convinced them that the best way to grow their audience was to only follow people who were tweeting with their same hashtag. And they took this amplification chamber and they turned it into an echo chamber. So in that, there is this lesson, number one, you want to have an amplification chamber, which means you want to have an audience which includes people that don't agree with you. And number two, you want to avoid the echo chamber. You want to avoid that process of only talking to the choir. And you want to, if you're going to be pushing strategy, you want to make sure that your people go the amplification route. And if you can convince the other side to go the echo route, that helps as well. Although I'd much rather win by winning the argument than suppressing the other side's voice. But that's sort of the basic, the model there. So my point with this presentation was to lay out a lot of different things that are going on. And we can get deeper into it in Q&A. And I'll hand it over to Scott.
Who wants to be extra super?
If you don't have two-step authentication on your accounts, you should set that. These days, things get compromised. Well, I'm starting to realize if it just pops up on your screen and somebody stole your phone, it's probably not good. You need to change that setting online. Cell phone is probably, text message is probably not as good as email. Email's behind the wall. Likewise, if it's your face or your fingerprint, you don't necessarily have to be alive to satisfy that security requirement.
Thank you.
Well, now I feel better.
Just saying.
So, something like you'll be at home, your dog will be buying stuff for you with your thumb.
Yeah, you know, the Prime Minister, he.
I know, and that's what I'm thinking.
There we go. All right. So, my name is Scott Simpson, as you've probably heard. This is my firm, Residence Campaigns. I'm going to go through some stuff that we've done before in terms of direct mail that we do a lot of, and digital communication that we do a little bit of, and just kind of show you how we've used that stuff in different campaigns to try and persuade voters, and kind of talk about how that relates to how I think people actually make decisions in political campaigns and things like that. So I didn't bring any, I don't think, but is everybody familiar with the idea of political mail pieces? Like, these are the ones you get at election time that tell you how great somebody like Monty Mason is. The great thing about political mail is that, and in mail in general, why it's used so much and why we're just printing forests full of trees right now before the election, is because it puts something physical in people's hands, and also we can figure out when we target exactly the households that we want to talk to. We can target people who our models suggest are highly persuadable if we talk to them about Donald Trump, or that are highly persuadable in the governor's race, and not talk to the people that we don't want to, who we know already like our candidate or who don't like the candidate, and we don't have to waste time on people that we don't think are very likely to vote based on everything that we can model about them too. So the great thing about mail, and I think the thing about all political mediums that actually are effective is when you're talking about persuading somebody, the people who are actual persuasion targets in a political campaign hate political communication. They are like hiding under chairs. They are not on Twitter trying to find out what the latest thing about the issue is. They have, I think it's like essentially a values conflict about this particular race. They can't figure out the difference. So until the end of the election, they're doing everything they can to avoid the information, because it creates for them this, I think, really important phrase, cognitive dissonance, right? Where they have a conflict now, something they believe and something they don't believe, banging into each other. And so why would you want to have that experience when you can watch HGTV and have the rest of your day go really good? You got to stop and think about things, then that's terrible. So what we try to do is, I think for all political mediums, the reason why there's so many TV ads still is because they work. And the reason why, we do focus groups and people are like, oh my, these mailers are terrible. They don't persuade me. They do. That's why we continue to do them. It's nobody looks at things on the internet that they shouldn't, except they do, and that's why those things exist. So the great thing about mail too is that it can be targeted. When you run a television commercial, you have to pay for everybody in the Philadelphia media market. You get Philly and Pittsburgh and Harrisburg TV here, right? So think about all those congressional districts that you're not in. You're getting television commercials for all of those candidates right now, even though you can't vote for them. And you probably, if there was a Delaware race right now, you would get those commercials, and you get the New Jersey Senate races commercials, and you can't vote for those people, but they have to, because the Philadelphia media market is the best way to get people in front, get in front of those voters that they can't reach, except for mail. This is a map of the state of Virginia and the congressional district. With mail, we can put it directly into the 5th congressional district, or the 10th congressional district that's way up there in the northern part of the state that overlaps with the DC market. So mail, I'm not wasting any reach on anybody that's not able to vote for the candidate I have. I know it's going to get in their hand. And then the other thing I know that everybody does with every piece that we spend a lot of time with is they throw it away. And people always are like, well, I just throw that straight into the trash. Well, the thing you have to do with your mail every day, and this isn't really the truth if you're at college, because I don't think it works the same way, but when you're at home, and you have to figure out what you can throw away every day, right? There's 3 credit card offers, and there's this, this Land's End catalog, and then there's this piece from Monty Mason. And so we designed them so that you get the message we're trying to drive as you throw it away. There's this 8-second rule, which I think is ridiculous. That's like an eternity. You could read most of the Bible in 8 seconds. Not really, but you can read all of every mail piece we need in 8 seconds and have a conversation about it. I think people probably look at them for 2 or 3 seconds if we do a really good job, and then throw it away. But that's the point. They got it, even though they didn't want to, right? If you're a conflicted person, I got the mail piece in front of you, even if you didn't want it. By the end of the election, some people might be getting 20 and 30 pieces a day. We start to simplify it by then. But that's basically what happens. But so why wouldn't you put the same thing on a billboard, right? Well, it's the same thing. We did one campaign that's not, we didn't actually put this on a billboard. That's the magic of graphic designers. But we did a campaign where we saw on, I think it was April 25th, that our opponent just bought a billboard. And we were like, this is fantastic. He's not listening to any of his consultants. Because when you buy a billboard, you not only have to pay for all of the eyes that go by it, and this was a primary election, so not a lot of people actually voted in it, but the billboard has to run for 30 days. So he put it up on April 25th, and the election was May 14th. He was going to pay for all these extra days, and we knew he had really smart people working with him. We were like, oh, he's not listening to them, so like we actually have a chance, and we ended up winning it. But that's why like I look all the time for like ways political campaigns are wasting money. Billboards is like the greatest waste of money you can do for the most part, because it's not efficient, it's not targeted, it doesn't get in front of people. I mean, that doesn't really deliver a message. When that's a mail piece, there's an opening part to it, and everything else is inside of it. So one campaign that we worked on that was a pretty big deal was Doug Jones' election last year against Roy Moore. And in that campaign, white voters made up 66% of the electorate. They ended up going for Jones 30% and for Moore 68%. And so the interesting thing about that was that, I don't know if you remember, like Roy Moore was a pedophile that continued to get support, but like our win number in that race was to get 32% of white voters to vote for Doug Jones, a former prosecutor. It doesn't seem impossible. But we actually didn't hit that win number. Like, we didn't get the vote, the share of the vote that we needed among white voters. We figured black voters would be 30% of the vote, and we needed to get like 91% of the vote there. But what ended up happening is that black voters were actually slightly less, but we performed better than we expected. And one interesting thing, like, and I worked on Hillary's campaign, and there's lots of things we could say about what went wrong there, but her support among black voters was never this high. And it wasn't as high as Obama's was. Doug Jones got 98% of the vote among black women. I don't know if you can calculate that with like some kind of error rate, but that basically means like the 2% who voted for Roy Moore probably did it by accident, right? Like they didn't actually mean. There must be like some statistical way to analyze that. So with black men, it was like 92%, which was higher than Hillary got in most states that we left. That's exit polls, which are sometimes fishy, but these are just some of the mail pieces that we did, and then that's the split between white women and white men and black men, and then black women and black men. You can see it's 98%. But so the campaign brought us on pretty late in this, and they asked us to do mail, and their original universe was like, well, we want to do black voters who voted in a presidential election, in last two presidential elections, because it was a special election. And no one ever usually votes in special elections. Usually it's super primary voters, right? They vote only in the primary elections. But we pointed out to them, like, okay, that came up with a universe of like 200,000 households, which is when we mail, we always talk about households. And so we said, like, well, if everybody, all 200,000 of those voters vote for us, we're still gonna lose. So like, there's no point in just mailing. So we expanded it to like 400,000 voters, which was basically like if you were black and you had ever voted at all, or you had registered since 2014, we were sending mail to you. And so that ended up what we're doing. And so we did pieces that told Doug Jones' story and really talked about what he had done. And he had this like fascinating story that he was the guy who 30 years later prosecuted the Ku Klux Klansman who blew up the church in Birmingham, which is this famous story, obviously, in Birmingham. And it was particularly powerful for black voters. We did focus groups, and we'd done polling just of black voters that kind of showed what the messages were that were really strong. So we told Doug's story. We also did some pieces that just talked about how he would, was concerned about economic issues that were important to black voters. And really just kind of like introduced him so that black voters knew about who Doug Jones was, and that he was a Democrat, and that he was focused on kind of the issues that they were concerned about. And then the other thing is, like, besides the fact that he was a pedophile, which like it's weird to not use that as like a hyperbolic term. Like, no, he was actually a pedophile. Mm-hmm. Roy Moore has this like ridiculous record of just like of ridiculous segregationist things that he like fought to keep like racism in the Constitution, that there were certain things there, and then he had ties to KKK groups, to Ku Klux Klan groups, and all these other things that we put into mail, and that we voted to kind of not only just encourage our base to turn out, but also kind of persuade them with messages that really talked about what Roy Moore had done in his past. These are ones that like encourage people to vote. One of the things that we do a lot when we do direct mail is pieces that say make a plan to vote. We found like there's been a lot of testing. You send people 2 pieces. If you send them one that says, hey, make a plan to vote, like think about what you're actually going to do that day. Like remember that it's this date. In this particular election, it was December 12th. Nobody's used to voting in the middle of December when they're also, you know, getting ready for Christmas. Figure out where you need to vote and know when you're going to vote. Like think through your day that day. So we do a lot of testing in mail in general now, where we send 2 groups of voters different pieces, and then we keep a control group out to figure out what actually motivates people, and then you see after the election who actually voted and if the pieces had any difference over the control group. It's really a kind of a popular thing. We do these things called social pressure letters that say your friends and neighbors are counting on you to vote, or like, here's when you voted before, so protect your good voting record. Those are all things that we do to kind of try to turn voters out. I don't know if you, like, this piece was like the bane of my existence for 2 weeks. Basically, the campaign asked us to do this piece, and then we did it, and it became like the closest, like it was a media sensation for a week, right? It was all over NPR, it was in the New York Times, it was like on cable news 5 days after. Originally I tried to talk, I'm like, I don't think this angle actually works, I don't think it makes that much sense, and they insisted on doing it, and we tested it again with focus groups, and it was the most popular piece among focus groups when we tested it with black voters. And most voters really liked it, but what happened, interestingly, kind of with what Alan was saying, is the right-wing media grabbed onto it and said Doug Jones is race baiting this election, it's terrible, we have to stop it. So it was just it was the only hiccup in the entire campaign for Doug Jones was that this mailer became a media focal point. So I was more relieved than excited when Doug won on election night. So these are other ones that we just did that are kind of turnout pieces that we did to make sure people got it, and again, make a plan of when they'll know when to vote. So that's kind of how when we do direct mail, we do a plan, and if there's several pieces, and we kind of think through how we get things into people, and just the same way that you see television commercials repeatedly because they buy lots of points of television, of gross rating points. Mail pieces work in repetition, all communication works because you hear it several times. The more you hear it, the more likely you are to be persuaded by it, or at least go along with what we're trying to get to. Okay, so the next thing I want to just talk to you about is digital communication, which I think is in its infancy in terms of political campaigns. There are lots of digital communications firms. There are a lot, in the same way that there are, for political consulting firms, there's always been people who do TV, there's always been people who do direct mail, and there's people who do polling. Digital is the next big thing. It's kind of a mixture between the two things. When we started our firm, we said that we did digital communication and direct mail, and we'd never actually done any digital communication at that point, but we figured at some point we would. So the interesting thing I think about digital communication is what we did for this particular one was you can take the voter file, and so we could take, say, black voters and progressive white voters in North Carolina that we wanted to target, and we could match them against the digital buyers database to try to make sure we were getting the targets we wanted to do. The buyer we work with actually targets people based on their cable box. So they can go, okay, you've actually matched this person, so we can serve to ads to this person's IP address. They might know the phone that links up with that IP address because they know that it hits it when it goes home. So they'll serve ads to it. When you do that, you actually only get 60% of the list to match, so you have a really big mix. You have a miss of 40% of the voters aren't gonna actually match. So what we do, and we did in this particular race, is for the voters that didn't match, that we weren't gonna get by digital, we we sent them direct mail. And I think that's something that in the future that we'll do a lot more of when there isn't a digital match. And I'm sure the digital match will get better, but we can send direct mail to those households too so that they get the message. I think the other thing that goes along with it, these are called display ads. The other thing that you probably see on the internet or when you're watching things, if you're gonna watch something on YouTube, is what's called pre-roll, where there's a commercial that comes before the YouTube video you wanna watch. Something that I found out that I was mystified before is I taught a class at the University of Florida and I started to talk to people about pre-roll, and I was like, it's like the video that comes on before you watch it, and everybody in the class was like, no, we use ad blockers, we never. So you're all that, like, I had no idea what an ad blocker was. I didn't know there was I could wait to hit skip. So I think the thing about digital advertising in general is like, can anyone remember the last time you clicked on a banner ad? Like, the joke before was like, the last time somebody clicked on a banner ad was because they fell asleep at their computer and they accidentally clicked on it. Like, we're really good at avoiding advertising online. Like, it's what you do, right? Like, you don't want to watch the video because you want to instantly watch the stupid thing your cousin sent you with cats immediately, right? You're not, if you're watching TV, for the most part, a lot of them you can't skip if you're watching on demand, or if you're watching TV and the commercial comes on, you're at the gym or you're somewhere else, you don't usually skip that commercial. You don't change the channel just because the commercial's on. Maybe late in the cycle you start to do that. But I think a lot of the problem with digital, and in this campaign in particular, like, the number of people who actually see this and click on them, it's like less than 6%, right? But like, campaigns are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this. I'm not totally convinced that it's like, it's the best use of money, or like it's not as effective right now as putting a mail piece in somebody's hands, right? But these are ones we did. This is an organization that wanted to get people to vote against 6 constitutional amendments that are on the ballot in North Carolina. So these are the different digital ads. You can see the kind of ones that they might have. Like, if you're on that website, you get the one across, you might get the one to the right. We also put them on Facebook. Just like a lot of different, and we tested 3 different versions on it, and after like a week or 2, you can see, does one version get people to click on it more than another version does? What we found out is it didn't really matter, actually. But so these are kind of what they are. They're animated too, so that they do that kind of stuff. And it takes people to the website and shows them more information about the ballot initiatives. And again, we produced a video too, which I didn't put in here. But the video just kind of goes through exactly why you would want to do that. So that was an organization in North Carolina that wanted to get people to vote against these ballot initiatives. And they had to kind of like think about, their strategy was, okay, there's 6 of these amendments, how do we get people to vote against all of them? Even though some of them aren't that bad, but it was like, it's too confusing to say to somebody like, well, vote no on 4, 5, and 2, but vote yes on 1, 2, or 1, 3, and 4, right? Or whichever ones. So we came up with vote against all 6. They kind of had that kind of stuff, and that's kind of how we drove that to do it. And the other thing about digital is you can do it really late. You can do things GOTV. Like for direct mail, we have to like design everything that we're going to do and print it within the next 4 days and be done with it by next Wednesday. Whereas you could add more things to digital all the way up until election day. You could basically be doing other stuff that takes it all over. I think like the long and the short of it that I would just to get back to is, I think my view on communication and persuasion is that there isn't actually that much persuasion that goes along. I don't think that people stop and think about issues, even if it's something like this where they're ballot initiatives about each one individually. People have identities that they bring to politics that goes along with how their views are going to be shaped. There's like, even in congressional districts, in the presidential race, there's almost no one that's persuadable, I think we found out. But in other races where they're not familiar with particular politicians, there's very few people who are actually persuadable. So a lot of the goal of our communication is to just get at those people and get a message in front of them that's going to that may give them doubts about somebody, or try to raise the profile of somebody they haven't heard of so that they know, oh, well, I wanted to vote for a Democrat and this person seems to be like an acceptable choice right now. So that is what I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I have.
Questions, folks?
So I really enjoyed your presentation. The reason our Facebook feeds look the way they do, right, is because Facebook has realized we like reading news that we agree with. And we like reading news that, even if it's fake, that we agree with. Now, me consuming fake news has like a negative externality on others, right? I'm a less informed voter. But what I didn't get from your talk is, how do we fix this problem, right? How do we kind of stop this from happening in the future?
Yeah, so there are a couple things. I had a friend of mine messaged me a couple months ago saying, how do I want to see more of what the right is saying on social media, and I'm not seeing any of it. How do I do it? And I told him, I said, go to Breitbart, go to Fox, like those pages, you'll start seeing more. And within a couple of days, he was seeing more. So it's really important to proactively like and diversify your news feed. That said, Facebook changes things, and so during, as recently as the tax cut fight last year, your news feed was filled with content from pages, from media outlets, from organizations. And as a result of that, strategy for campaigns like that would be to create a coalition of multiple organizations that were sharing each other's content from one page to the other in order to push it out to their respective audiences. Well, then Facebook changed the algorithm late last year, early this year, in response to a lot of the criticisms that they were getting, to prioritize what your friends were sharing, not what your pages you like were sharing. And so now all of a sudden we have to think, oh, well, if I have an organization and I want to put out a message, I don't want to reach out to my coalition members and say, share it on your page. What I want to do is reach out to my activists and reach out to the staff at other organizations and at my organization and say, hey, use your profile to share this stuff. And then it can percolate back up to pages. So we have to, it's a bit of a moving target. But the idea is that you have to deliberately choose to see stuff that to diversify your own feed. You have to take control of your own feed. Increasingly, I think there's pressure on social media to give you that control. Now, Twitter, you see pretty much everything you follow, and you can create lists of the things that that collected different categories and monitor those lists. So Twitter gives you a ready set of tools to do this kind of stuff. Facebook isn't quite there yet. They have some tools, but it's not as nearly as intuitive. And I think that the demand for people to have more control over the news feed will give us more opportunity to make sure that we see stuff. Now, that still leaves the fact that there are some people who aren't interested in seeing stuff they don't agree with. And the reality is that's just the way it is. So what I do is I make sure I figure out, well, what hashtags do they use, what websites are they reading, what pages are they reading, and I insinuate my messages into those feeds, into those hashtags, and I deliberately cross-post. And that's how I get it there. And I get people noticing, and I get back and forth. So that's not from the perspective of the receiver. That's from the perspective of somebody who wants to put more information in front of the other side from the producer.
So I have a question. So in moving forward, which social media do you think will be used? I saw an ad for Jess King on Snapchat. And I'm sure Instagram is actually pretty popular as well.
So I find Snapchat and Instagram to be a waste of money for this stuff. Snapchat, by and large, I think are people who go there who don't want to be inundated with stuff from people they don't know. It's a peer-to-peer platform first and foremost. People are going there to talk to their friends and only their friends. That's number one. Instagram is great for sort of image branding, but you can't share stuff. You can share it to Facebook, but you can like something on Instagram, but you can't share it. So there's no network effect going on there. And unless you pay to promote content on Instagram, there's no link embedded in what you're doing either. So you can swap out the link on your bio, but if people don't click back to your bio, then it's useless. So from an organizer's perspective, neither one of those is very good. From a branding imagery, Instagram can be good. From a geo-fenced event kind of conversation thing, Snapchat can be good. And using them can both make you look cool without necessarily making you effective.
I think Instagram's got a little bit more reach because you can serve videos on it and they're expanding there. But you can also send somebody you can send, right? You can
It's
say
here.
Yeah.
But it, so
Amplify to a group, I guess.
So you do get that value, but it's very small scale, much smaller scale than you would think, given the amount of people that are on Instagram.
I think Facebook right now, the amount of that video can be shown there is pretty high, and like it's starting in your feed and doing it, and that I think is pretty effective.
Although recently it just broke that Facebook was inflating those numbers, so we don't know really what videos they like on Facebook.
So going off what he said, with the whole amplification of what you see, doesn't it kind of contradict what we're trying to do if all you see is things that your friends share and stuff like that? It kind of just kind of puts you backwards. How is that effective?
I mean,
Like broadening, seeing other, and not just political things, but just other things in general. How is that effective?
well, this goes to some of the things you were talking about. In and of itself, an online ad may not be so good, like a banner ad, nobody clicks on it, but they see it the same way they see a mail piece that they throw away. You know, there's that moment, it's the corner of your eye. And if they see an ad online for a moment, and then the next day they get a mail piece, the mail piece is going to have more impact because it's going to trigger a memory that I've seen this before, and that gives it an extra couple of seconds of attention. And I think so when you start to use the different channels as with their limitations as ways to prime the response for the next engagement. So Instagram can be very effective at priming the next, the impact of the next piece that they see, either a direct mail piece or an email or an online ad, you know, whatever it is. They sort of build on each other. And I think that the more holistically we start thinking about the delivery of the message between paid and organic, social, digital, offline, and being able to weave them together so they reinforce each other, I think is really important. So like, I might not only go to a direct mail piece to people who didn't see the ad. I may still do a direct mail piece to people who did see the ad for that second hand, for that reinforcement.
Are you also asking about like how it broadens your perspective and learning
Yeah.
about other things? Like it doesn't,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
terrible. It's like it's the instant gratification of like 10 seconds that somebody wrote something that you like versus like, I mean, it's the reason you go check your Facebook feed is because they created it so that you will enjoy looking at it and you get dopamine every time you check it, right? And Instagram creates that search thing with the stupid channels of like, I don't know how they decided I should see 50-er, but like it's like bad college kid tricks where people are like slamming their heads into things, and the next thing you know, you've looked at it for an hour, but it's not.
So
like,
they were right.
yeah, they timed it. They knew I would look at like people breaking their head, but I think that's social media is not like a great like way for you to explore and figure out the difference between one thing. Only because like I don't know. We were talking about this before. I don't look for people to disagree with me. Maybe I'm older at this point and I don't care, but like, why would you want to see that? I mean, it's designed for you to like things and see them. I don't know that everyone is set up so that you're like, oh, look at the way she designed her house, and oh, here's an interesting policy position on immigration reform. Like, that's not what you're set up to do.
I also think there's different types of people, so and they use the medium differently. So tapping into the targeting technology, both on the ad side and on the organic hashtags and people tagging, can direct your messaging to the right audience at the right time. And you know, like on a lot of social media, on Twitter, for example, you know, my primary focus is on influencing influencers. Right? So it's getting the message to the people who talk to people offline, getting the message to journalists who write about stuff, getting messages to people who are local organizers, and leveraging that sort of validated messenger to their network approach. That's one approach. The other thing is, when you think about politics, there's sort of a mechanical or I don't know if it's cynical, but sort of a mechanical breakdown of what you're trying to do. There's 3 ways to win an election: turn out your base, win the middle, or suppress your opponent's turnout. Right? And so each of those is different in terms of who you target and what kinds of messages you're getting to them. Turning out your base is about getting them excited, giving them a reason to vote. Right? The middle, it's some of them, 10% of them vote on policy. Some of them it's about values. Some of them it's about just warm, fuzzy feelings. The reason why we do negative attacks against our opponent is to suppress the vote. When you're going to vote for a candidate, but you're not 100% backing them, but they're your party, if I can convince you that they're, a piece of that they're a terrible person, you might decide, well, I'm going to sit this one out. And that helps the other side. So different goals, different audiences, different messaging, and different ways of targeting those messages to those different people. You start to break it down that way, rather than think of social media monolithically, or think about TV advertising monolithically. With TV we can target shows, we can target cable, with direct mail we can target by address and what we know about people, micro-targeting. All these things allow us to really fine-tune what we do to get the most impact out of each of the different efforts that we do.
I have another question for you. So with the younger generation, I guess, like current generation, I guess you would say, do you think going through social media is going to be the more effective way to get people that way to vote, or are you still going to stick with the mail?
I mean, I think that there's definitely, and digital communication is more effective than mail with younger voters, definitely. I think that that's another thing they've done tests on. But I think that there's an interesting problem of younger people don't look at Facebook anymore, right? And they just look at Instagram. I think in general, there are things that lead people to go vote, and largely that's they get older. You stay in the same place. You get married, your schools start to stink, or that you're afraid they're going to stink, so you vote, right? You become a more consistent voter the older you get, and the more stake you have in it, as opposed to when you're younger and some people really care and other people are whatever. But I think in terms of getting people to vote, in particular, texting I think is becoming a lot more prevalent with sending people messages. That has to be, interestingly, the laws around texting are that you can't blast it. It's not a medium where I can say send a text to these 10,000 people. It has to be done by a volunteer sitting in a room or somebody in a call center sending individual texts to people.
There is tech to help facilitate that.
Yeah.
But by and large, yes, it's a manual process.
So I think those are interesting ways. We've tested all these things to figure out if you send someone called a social pressure letter, that says, hey, whether or not you vote is public, so after the election we're going to know that you voted. That is really effective in getting people to vote. It's kind of a shaming. There's these things called the Nudge Project in England that they looked at with getting people to return library books or pay taxes and do everything else, that they've figured out what's the best way to get somebody to do this behavior, right? The best way to get somebody to do behavior is not usually ask them to do it, but you can say hey, if you vote, we're gonna know whether or not you voted. Everybody in your block is gonna vote. Or so we send ones that score your community. It says, your voting record is average and your community is above average, and that gets people to vote. So that might be something that gets delivered through social media. But I think the other thing is that people who vote have mailboxes. So the more mail still becomes this pretty effective thing. And then the the other example I like to use about mail is that, does anyone have Amazon Prime now? Right, like, I started using Amazon Prime now because they sent me a postcard. And I don't understand why, like, I buy millions of things from Amazon all the time. And for some reason, they didn't serve me 80 digital ads that said, use this Prime now, and they thought it was worth it to send them a postcard, and I remember getting it and going, oh, I can get this stuff delivered to my house in 2 hours? That's great. So, like, I think we have an amazing postal system in this country, thankfully, that continues to make mail pretty relevant.
Scott's comment about as you get older and more stake is a really powerful one and very true. And as far as youth voting, the movements that we're seeing that are getting the most traction among the youth, the Parkland Never Again movement, the Youth Climate March movement, these are young Americans who are making the case that their stake is growing as a result of policies that will affect them the rest of their lives, and they're mobilizing their own communities based on this notion of my stake is growing even though I'm a young person. So they're trying to steal from that idea that the greater your stake is, the more likely you are to be politically active, and they're using social media to deliver that message to large numbers of young people to make them start thinking earlier about their stake in the process. Maybe that's how.
I want to put a plug in for vote411.org, which is the League of Women Voters website, because I think what I hear from a lot of younger people is they're not able to get the information they want in order to make the decisions. They're getting these ads that are, many of them are negative, messaging, whether it's social media, whether it's direct mail, and they're wanting more information. I mean, what I'm hearing from people is, I don't feel like voting because I don't feel like I don't know enough to be able to vote for somebody. And so I just want to put the plug in for Vote 411 for the young people that are here to go for unbiased information about political candidates and in your area codes. You just plug in, go to that and put your area code in. Your zip code. Put your zip code in and get some information.
The irony scares me. People say I won't vote because I don't know enough.
Right.
And yet, how many people do we have in this country that vote completely ignorant of facts? I wish more people the first way.
But it does bring up the point, though, I like about the ad set that you had in digital, which was the plan, creating a plan, and the call to action. The call to action, rather than just a blanket, here's what I'm for, here's what I'm against. The call to action of make sure you know where you're voting, make sure you know when the registration date is, and sending out that message 2 days before the registration date. You've got 48 hours to get registered. Now you've got a couple days before the polls open. You've got X number of days to still get your absentee ballot. That's the specificity of here's my candidate and here's the call to action. With specifics of dates, times, and what have you, I think that's a powerful approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've actually found for testing that different from what was in those pieces is that when you put the candidate on the piece with make a plan, it actually, like, the test would show that it has a negative effect. That when it looks like it's official, like it looks like something that is voter information, people are more likely to go and vote. And then the key there is, like, we send it to demographics that we want to vote.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So I think, but yeah, that's why I think it's been effective, because people are figuring out and they don't want a candidate. People don't like politicians, right? I always joke that, like, the thing about negative campaign stuff is that there's some truth to it. Whereas the positive stuff, like, hey, this person really isn't that great, but I tell you that they are.
Mm-hmm.
The negative thing, like, there's something truthful. This person really voted that way 8 times.
Sorry. Do you think Trump is going to go, in 2 years, do you think he's going to go the same way his campaign did since they were so successful? Or do you think it's going to be different? Or does it depend on who's going to be voting against him?
So if you look at his behavior, he seems to repeat what he thinks works. If you take the accounts that he's not being shown all the information information that he needs to make those informed decisions, he may make those decisions incorrectly. On the other hand, you know, he's elevated Brad Parscales from his digital director to his campaign manager. Parscales is, you know, from all I've seen and heard from him, he's the type of guy that is learning all the time, testing all the time. And so I think that, and if you hear what he talked about in the campaign, there was a lot of focus on what Trump was doing up front, but there was a lot more subtlety and professional and just really innovative stuff going on behind the scenes that we had no clue of, that Trump probably knew, whether or not he knew about it, gave no indication of it. And so I think that the team he has will continue to push the envelope on how to do these things, and will always look for new ways to tap into this stuff. He may not actually recognize what's going on, at least not.
But he's the product. He's the product, and they're sophisticated in their analysis of how to make that product sell. He's the product, he's the entertainment value. They're good at what they do.
And the question is whether or not the product becomes too toxic or not.
Yeah.
I think it can be.
Well, for some people it can't be. For other people it can't be. It just keeps getting more toxic all the time. And then there's this group in the middle that are pragmatists, that see Trump as the key to getting another conservative member of the Supreme Court, a key to getting conservative policies signed into law. If the House switches to the Democrats, there's no more laws coming through that he can sign into so that you sort of take that off the table. Having filled the 2 seats that were easily filled in the Supreme Court, and recognizing that there are tens of thousands of people willing to donate organs to Ruth Bader Ginsburg to keep her alive for another 8 years or 6 years, you know, he may not be able to have another opportunity to deliver a Supreme Court justice. So he's already delivered on that. So, you know, some people may say, well, we've already got what we can out of him, and now what's left is toxic. What that breakdown is, I don't know. I mean, there are definitely 3 types of people there that we're looking at. The configuration is what we're doing.
I mean, if you're talking about the way that he campaigns, is he going to change it? Like, I think that is exactly what he knows works. And I think the toxicity is what works too. Like, there's a lot of angry people. The country has changed significantly in 30 years, right? And I think his target is like it's somebody who's a white non-college person whose standard of living has deteriorated over 30 years, right? Like they're not doing as well as they used to, or as well as they could have done. And so those people are receptive to somebody who's like, yeah, it's not your fault, and it isn't their fault that their standard of living is deteriorated, right? And so he's got these boogeymen that he can point to and say, here's why everything's falling apart for you. People are like, there's 1,000 people trying to get in the country right now and steal your job. I mean, it's record unemployment. Nobody's really, like, we need more people to take jobs. But all of those things go along. I think the interesting thing with the midterm will be like, I think Philadelphia suburbs will be pretty important, is like, in a lot of the races that have happened recently in special elections and other places, like white college-educated women have turned vehemently against Republicans and against Trump. And those suburbs in particular will be pretty important to do that. I mean, as kind of an indicator of whether it'll continue to go that way. The other important thing, whether he gets reelected too, is whether or not somebody runs against him in a primary. Because everybody that loses their second term almost always had a primary challenge. That made, like, Carter and Bush, they both had significant primary challenges. And if nobody, like, kind of points out that he's failing at something, and if the economy doesn't tank in the next 6 months, I think it will, but then I think he's in pretty good shape.
Hey, we're just about out of time, folks. Anybody have a last question they want to ask?
I suppose one last question might be this kind of balance between negative and positive advertising, whether it's digital or whether it's direct mail. Where, is it mostly, would you say it's mostly negative?
I think it depends on the race. Like you have to figure out the balance. Like most candidates won't let you just say negative things about your opponent, but I think usually when we do polling, we find out that would be the most effective thing you can do. We're doing a race in Oregon right now, which is a really liberal state. But we work for the governor, and her opponent is doing fairly well. Like he's fairly close. But the more we tell people that he has an anti-choice record, or he has a lifetime record of an F from the Oregon League of Conservation Voters, or he lied about X, Y, and Z, they didn't know him before, right? They thought, well, we don't love this lady, Kate Brown. Things here in Oregon are getting really expensive. She's probably to blame. So we'll go, this guy seems okay. He doesn't seem like a total jerk. He played baseball. If it's a race to tell them how many to disqualify him and tell people like, okay, you might think that it's a bad, that like things aren't great, but this would be terrible. And if you're a challenger, or if you're an incumbent and somebody's running, you might want to just put out everything you can about it. Again, like people tell us, and people at the highest level that we're dealing with will be like, well, people have told us we really don't want any negative communication, or that it's going to backfire. Like if that were true, you would drop negatives on yourself, right? But that doesn't make any sense. It's like you fill in the information. If something's credible and somebody believes it, then it works. If they've never heard of who the other person is, like if they don't know who you are, then you need a lot more positive to kind of introduce yourself and tell your story.
And as I was telling you, I mean, that a lot of times I'll see these direct mail pieces about that have a picture of Nancy Pelosi on it, and that's the way they're, that's their negative advertising. Is essentially, if you like this person, they're going to go Nancy Pelosi, and she's going to hold the gap.
So that's definitely what we're getting from the Republican side.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats have definitely identified that the only way they're going to win in a lot of these cases is to turn out their base. And when that's your strategic goal, there are a lot of people in the base that need a reason to vote for you. And so, at least for that aspect of the strategy, they need to be positive about themselves. What do they offer? It can't just be the other side is bad. But as I was saying, there's three things that you're trying to accomplish. Depending on the prioritization of those three things, that affects the type of messaging you want to run with, because the different messaging has a different effect on each of those different segments.
Sometimes it doesn't have any effect. I'm also fairly convinced that works.
Yeah. Sometimes people just already know they're going to vote for it, and the issue is whether or not they do vote.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.